Everything started with a busted laptop charger and a borrowed conference room I wasn't supposed to be in. I was 28, 2 years into a mid-sized logistics firm in Austin, and my job title was Operations Coordinator, which sounds important until you realize it mostly means you're the guy who builds the decks other people present and fixes the spreadsheets other people break. I was good at it, better than good. But being good at invisible work is like being fast in a room with no windows. Nobody clocks it. That Tuesday morning, my charger had fried overnight and IT wasn't going to have a replacement until after lunch. So I grabbed my laptop on battery, found an empty room on the 9th floor that I technically had no reason to be in, and settled in to finish a quarterly cost model before our 11 o'clock. The 9th floor was where the senior leadership team sat. I'd been up there maybe twice in 2 years, both times to drop off printed materials that could have been emailed. Both times I'd felt like a delivery driver who'd wandered into the wrong section of a hotel. I was 40 minutes into the model when the door opened without a knock. Vivian Cross walked in, stopped when she saw me, and looked at me the way you look at a car parked in your spot. Not angry, just recalibrating. Vivian was the Chief Strategy Officer. She had been at the company 11 years, had rebuilt the Western Regional operation from near zero, and was the kind of person who made senior directors triple-check their numbers before any meeting she was attending. I had seen her from across rooms. I had never been the only other person in one. "I reserved this room," she said. "I didn't see a booking. I can move." She looked at her phone, then at the screen on the wall. Apparently I put it in for 10 instead of 9. She paused. "What floor are you from?" 7. She studied me for a second, not unkindly, just the way someone does when they're filing information. Then she pulled out the chair across from me, set her portfolio on the table, and sat down. "You've got an hour," she said. "I'll work here until my call." I didn't argue. I put my head back down and worked. For the first 15 minutes, neither of us said anything. She was on her laptop, moving fast, clicking through something with the rhythm of someone who doesn't waste motion. I was finishing my model, which had a column that wasn't balancing and was starting to make me quietly furious. "Your formula's referencing the wrong tab," she said without looking up. I glanced over. She hadn't moved. "What?" "Column G. You got it pulling from sheet 3, but your base data is on sheet 5. It's been throwing your variance off for the last 4 rows. I looked at my screen. She was right. I hadn't said a word about what I was working on. "How did you?" "I could see it in your reflection." She nodded at the window behind me. "Glass buildings are inconvenient." I fixed the formula. The model balanced immediately. I sat there for a second, not sure what to do with that. "Thanks," I said. She made a small sound that wasn't quite a response and kept working. That was the whole conversation. She left at 10 for her call. I packed up around the same time and went back to 7 feeling like something had been slightly rearranged in my head without my permission. I didn't think about it much after that. Or I tried not to. The kind of not thinking about something that takes a little effort. 3 days later, I was in a project review that had gone sideways. Our operations director, a guy named Kevin, had presented carrier rate projections that were built off last quarter's fuel index instead of the current one. By the time someone caught it, the client-facing summary had already been distributed. People were doing what they always do in those moments, talking very fast and very confidently about whose fault it wasn't. I'd caught the discrepancy 20 minutes earlier when I was prepping backup notes in the adjacent room. I had already rebuilt the affected section, printed clean copies, and had the corrected digital file ready to push. I walked into the room, set the packets down, and quietly told Kevin which slides had updated figures. He looked at me. "How long have you had this?" "Long enough to fix it." He used it. The meeting continued. No one said anything to me directly. But afterward, walking out of the conference room, I heard Vivian's voice behind me. "You didn't announce that you had the fix." I turned around. She was a few feet back, jacket over one arm, the same direct look from the conference room on the 9th floor. Announcing it would have taken longer. She tilted her head slightly, like she was deciding something. "What's your name?" "Luca. Luca Merritt." She nodded once, said nothing else, and turned toward the elevator. I went back to my desk and stared at my screen for a while before I actually started seeing it. The following week she emailed me directly. No introduction, no pleasantries, just a forwarded document and a single line. Look at page 11. Tell me what's wrong with it. Page 11 was a vendor analysis. The issue was that 2 line items had been averaged instead of summed, which understated the total exposure by about $40,000. I replied with a corrected version and a 2-sentence explanation. Her response came back 4 minutes later. Good, I'm sending you something else this afternoon. That was how it started, not with a conversation or a formal invitation, just a series of documents that kept arriving, each one a little more complex, each one preceded by the same absence of preamble. She didn't explain what she was preparing for. She didn't tell me why she was using me. She just kept sending things, and I kept sending back what was wrong with them and how I'd fix it. After 2 weeks of this, I asked, in the most careful way I could manage, whether there was a specific project I was supposed to be supporting. Her response, yes. The one I'm working on? That's enough for now. I showed that reply to nobody because I didn't know how to explain it. Around that time, I started noticing things at the office. A manager named Derek, who used to wave vaguely in my direction when he needed something, now used my last name when he copied me on emails. A woman from the analytics team named Priya asked me in the break room, in a tone that was almost but not quite casual, why I was included in Vivian's distribution list for the Pacific Accounts Review. I said I wasn't sure. Priya smiled with her mouth and not the rest of her face and went back to her coffee. The actual shift came on a Thursday evening. I was in a small conference room on 7, finishing a network cost summary, when Vivian walked in and sat across from me without asking if I had time. I need someone for an 8 o'clock call tomorrow morning, she said. Pacific Carrier Group. They're pushing back on our revised lane pricing, and I want a second voice on the line who knows the numbers well enough to respond in real time, not from a briefing, actually knows them. I looked at her. Who was originally going to be on the call? Kevin. What happened to Kevin? He doesn't know the numbers well enough to respond in real time. I didn't ask anything else. Send me everything you have on the Pacific accounts tonight. Already done, she said. It came through while you were talking. I checked my phone. She was right. She stood, picked up her portfolio, then stopped at the door. You eat before long calls or after? Before. Good. There's a place on 2nd Street that opens at 7. Don't be late. She left. I sat there for a moment, aware that something had just changed shape in a way I didn't fully have language for yet. Breakfast was not what I'd expected, which I realized says more about my expectations than anything else. I'd assumed it would be a working session. Documents on the table, agenda items, a professional debrief, and it was partially. We went through the Pacific accounts end to end, talked through where the pushback would come from, agreed on which concessions were real and which ones were positioning. But she also asked me where I was from. I told her, small city in Ohio, state school, the first person in my family to work somewhere with a dedicated parking structure for executives. And yet you don't perform being impressed, she said. I'm impressed by people who are actually good at things. She looked at me across the table. That's either very confident or very naive. Probably both. She laughed. It was short, low, the kind of laugh that escapes before a person decides to let it. I registered it and kept my face mostly neutral. The call went well. The Carrier Group pushed on 3 points and conceded on 2 of them. Vivian led. I spoke 4 times, each time with a specific number or a specific clause from the contract, and each time the other side went quiet for a second before responding. After we hung up, Vivian closed her laptop and said, "You didn't second-guess yourself once." I knew the material. A lot of people know material, she said. They still hesitate. It's a self-permission problem. She picked up her things. I don't have that problem with you. I didn't know what to do with that either, so I let it sit. The weeks after that had a different texture. Vivian started including me in things that had no clean explanation. A vendor strategy session I had no official seat in. A budget alignment meeting that was 3 levels above my job title. She never made a production of it. She just started forwarding me invitations, and when I showed up, people looked at me the way they look at someone who arrived through a door they didn't know was there. Derek stopped waving. He started asking my opinion in meetings before he offered his own. Priya went from pointed questions in the break room to complete silence when I walked in, which was somehow worse. I ran into a woman named Kelsey from corporate finance one afternoon near the elevators. She and I had been friendly in the low-key way you're friendly with someone you see twice a week without ever having a real conversation. She looked at me that day like she was recalculating something. "You're in the Pacific Re-Ray project now?" "I've been helping with some of the analysis." "Helping," she said in a tone that suggested she thought that word was doing a lot of work. I didn't correct her. The harder thing happened about a month in. Derek pulled me aside after a cross-team review and told me, in the most collegial possible voice, that I was moving fast for someone who had been reformatting carrier reports 18 months ago. I said, maybe I was better at it than anyone thought. He smiled the way people smile when they're deciding not to say the real thing. Or maybe someone likes having you in the room. He walked away before I could respond. I stood there in the hallway for about 15 seconds longer than was probably natural, then went back to my desk and stared at a spreadsheet I couldn't actually see for a while. That evening, I was still at the office at 7:30, catching up on things I'd pushed back to make room for Vivian's projects when she appeared at my desk. She did that sometimes. No email first. Just appeared. "You look like something's been bothering you all day," she said. I looked up. Derek made a comment. "I know. He made it to someone else first, and it got back to me." She sat on the edge of the conference table near my desk. "Do you want me to address it?" "No," I said. "Not the way you're thinking." She raised an eyebrow. "What way am I thinking?" "The way that makes him quiet but gives everyone else something new to say." She was still for a moment. "Then how?" "Let me earn it in rooms where he's watching." She looked at me for a long second. Her expression didn't soften exactly, but something in it shifted, like a door that had been at one angle moving to another. "That's the right answer," she said quietly. She stayed for another 20 minutes. We weren't working on anything in particular. She asked about a book I had open on my desk. I asked about a building she'd mentioned she was trying to buy in San Marcos. The conversation moved the way conversations move when people stop filtering themselves and neither of them minds. At some point, I realized I'd stopped thinking of her as someone I reported to, even loosely. I wasn't sure when that had happened. She stood to leave and said, "I'm presenting to the board next Friday. I want you in the room." "As what?" "As someone who knows what he's talking about." She picked up her bag. "Dress accordingly." She left, and I sat there for a while in the quiet office thinking about the version of myself from 2 years ago who would have found that sentence incomprehensible. The board presentation went cleanly. Vivian moved through the material with the kind of control that makes a room feel like it's operating on her schedule. I sat along the wall, which was technically a seat for support staff, but twice during the Q&A, she turned and directed a question to me, and both times I answered directly enough that the follow-up questions came back to me instead of going back to her. After it ended, one of the board members, a woman in her 60s who had the air of someone who had stopped being impressed by things decades ago, caught my eye on the way out and gave me a brief nod. The kind that meant something without saying what. In the elevator down, Vivian was quiet. Then she said, "You stopped apologizing for knowing things." I noticed nobody else was apologizing for it. "When did you notice that?" "About halfway through the second question." She looked at me, and for a second her expression did something I hadn't seen before. Not warmth, exactly, but a kind of recognition, like seeing something confirmed that she'd been holding as a hypothesis. "Good," she said, "nothing else." There was a work dinner that night for the board, which I hadn't expected to attend. Vivian had added my name to the list without telling me, which I found out from a calendar invite that appeared on my phone while we were still in the elevator. The restaurant was in the warehouse district, the kind of place where the menu doesn't have prices on it and the acoustics are designed to make everything feel like a private conversation. I wore the charcoal jacket I'd bought 2 months earlier when I'd realized my wardrobe was increasingly out of step with the rooms I was being put in. Vivian was at the far end of the table when I arrived, talking to someone from the board. She caught my eye once and gave me a look that was more instruction than greeting. "Sit down. Be useful. Don't be nervous." I sat down. I was useful. I wasn't nervous, which surprised me a little. After the board members left, it was just the senior team and me at the end of the table, the conversation having gone from structured to loose in the way it does when the people watching have gone. Someone ordered another round. Derek made a joke I didn't find funny, and that nobody laughed at especially hard. Vivian was at the other end of the table, jacket draped over her chair, talking quietly to the CFO about something I couldn't hear. At some point, she moved down to where I was sitting, set her glass on the table, and said, "Walk out with me." Outside, the night air was cool for April, the kind of evening that Austin does well, where the temperature drops just enough to make the city feel like it's exhaling. We walked half a block from the restaurant before either of us said anything. "You held your own tonight," she said. "I had good material." She made a sound that was almost a laugh. "You always say that. The material, the numbers, the prep." She stopped walking and turned toward me. "At what point do you let it be you?" I looked at her. This close, in the low light, she looked less like the person who walked into boardrooms and more like someone who had been working very hard for a very long time. Tired in the specific way that comes from being the most capable person in most rooms for most of your adult life. "It's both," I said. "Yes," she said. "That's the whole point." Neither of us moved. The street was quiet enough that I could hear the restaurant noise behind us, muted and far away. "I don't usually do this," she said, not an explanation, more like a fact she was putting down somewhere. "I know." "I'm not sure you do." "Okay," I said, "but I'm not going anywhere." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she reached out and straightened the lapel of my jacket, 2 fingers, a small deliberate adjustment that didn't need to happen. I caught her hand before she pulled it back. She let me. I don't know which one of us closed the remaining distance. It didn't feel like either of us did exactly. It felt like the distance just stopped. She kissed me back with the same precision she brought to everything, certain and unhurried, like a decision already made. When we pulled back, she didn't look away or recalibrate or say something to reset the room. She just looked at me. "Well," she said. "Yeah," I said. She retrieved her hand, smoothed the front of her jacket, and said, "My car's at the end of the block." She gave her home address. I was aware, in a way I couldn't have articulated cleanly, that whatever I thought I understood about my life at this company had just become significantly more complicated. The Monday after was different in ways I noticed before anyone else could have named them. Vivian moved me into a project lead role on a supply chain restructuring initiative that had been sitting without a real owner for months. Officially, it was a lateral adjustment. In practice, it meant I had a seat in rooms I had previously entered only to deliver things and leave. I started carrying myself differently, not because I decided to, because the rooms demanded it, and at some point I stopped waiting for permission to meet the demand. Derek, to his credit or his defeat, adapted faster than I expected. He stopped making comments. He started including me in his pre-meeting prep notes, which was a kind of deference dressed up as collaboration. I took it as both. The harder adjustment was inside my own head, because I knew I had always known that Vivian had accelerated things. She had seen something and decided to move it forward, and that decision had opened doors I would have reached eventually, probably, but not this quickly and not this cleanly. And knowing that made me work twice as hard, which I think was part of her point. If she was going to put weight behind my name, I was going to be worth the weight. One afternoon, about 6 weeks after the dinner, I was reviewing a partner contract in her office while she finished a call in the adjacent room. When she came back in, she sat across from me and watched me read for a second. "You're not uncomfortable here anymore," she said. "No." "When did that change?" I thought about it. When I stopped waiting for someone to tell me I was supposed to be here. She set her pen down. "That's the thing about these buildings," she said. "Everyone's waiting for permission. From a title, from a door, from someone who walked through it before them." She looked at me evenly. "The people who move are the ones who decide the permission is theirs to give." I held her gaze. "Is that what you did?" "It's what I've done every day for 11 years. I didn't say anything to that. I didn't need to. In June, a major client account that had been rocky for 2 quarters came to a renegotiation point. The client was a regional freight aggregator out of Denver. significant enough that losing them would have been a visible hit on the company's annual numbers. Vivian had been managing the relationship personally. I had been in every prep session, had built every cost-benefit model, had sat in the room for 2 of the 3 most recent calls. On the morning of the final meeting, her assistant forwarded me a calendar update at 6:45 a.m. The meeting location had changed. It was no longer at our office. It was at the client's downtown office in Denver. My name was on the attendee list. Vivian called me at 7. "You saw the update," she said. "Yeah. You're not on the agenda as support." I waited. "You're on it as the lead from our side," she said. I was quiet for long enough that she added, "The flight's at 9:15. I'll be on it. But you're running the meeting." "Vivian, you know every variable in that account. You know where they're bluffing and where they're not. You know our floor and their pressure points. The only reason you'd hesitate is if you're still carrying around some version of yourself that belonged in a room 2 years ago." Her voice was even, not unkind. "That person doesn't exist anymore. Stop letting him take up space." I looked out my apartment window at the Austin skyline going orange in the early light. "Okay," I said. "There are briefing notes in your inbox. Read them on the plane. The contracts team confirmed the revised terms last night. I want a text the minute you're out of the room." "Yeah." A pause. "Luca." "Yeah." "Go close it." I closed it. The meeting ran 2 hours and 20 minutes. The client's VP pushed hard on 2 provisions and folded on both of them when I walked through the downstream cost implications with enough specificity to make the alternative look worse than the agreement. Vivian was in the room, sitting to my right, and said almost nothing the entire time. Twice she handed me a note with a figure on it. Both times I used it. On the flight back, somewhere over New Mexico, she leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. She'd been awake since before 5. The executive version of her was somewhere behind us in Denver. This version was just tired and real in the specific way that the end of a long, hard, well-done thing makes a person. After a while, she said, without opening her eyes, "You already knew you could do it." I thought I could. "No," she said. "You knew. You were just waiting to be sure someone else knew too." I looked at the clouds out the window. I didn't say anything because she was right and there wasn't much to add to it. She turned her head toward me then, eyes open, something quiet in her face that I didn't see anywhere else. "You should stop needing that," she said. "Not a criticism, just something true." "I'm working on it," I said. She looked at me for another second, then closed her eyes again. Her hand found mine on the armrest between us, and she left it there for the rest of the flight. Neither of us said anything about it. We didn't need to. When we landed, I had 14 unread messages from people at the office who wanted to know how it went. My inbox had 3 flagged items from senior directors who hadn't flagged anything from me 6 months ago. My name was on a calendar invite for next week that, a year earlier, I would have had to explain why I was attending. I sat in the back of the rideshare from the airport and looked at all of it on my phone and thought about the guy who used to arrive at the office early enough to have the conference rooms to himself, working on models that other people would present, making the machinery run without anyone noticing the hands on it. He hadn't disappeared. I could still feel him when it was very early or very late and the building was quiet, but he wasn't driving anymore. And for the first time since I'd walked into that borrowed conference room on the 9th floor with a dead laptop charger and 40 minutes of battery left, I let myself admit that I didn't want him to be. I still think about that first morning sometimes. A dead laptop charger and a borrowed room I had no business being in. That's the whole origin story. No grand plan, no calculated move, no networking strategy pulled from a career blog. Just a guy who needed an outlet and ended up sitting across from someone who noticed the formula error in his spreadsheet from a window reflection. That's the thing about cause and effect that nobody really talks about honestly. It's rarely the big swings that change your life. It's the small, unglamorous moments where you just do the work in front of you and don't make excuses for it. I fixed the model. I showed up to the meeting with corrected packets nobody asked for. I answered Vivian's forwarded documents like each one mattered because they did. None of it felt significant in the moment. It only looks like a pattern from the other side of it. What I've come to understand is that the ground shifts for people who stay decent under pressure. Not performatively decent, Not the kind where you're calculating how it looks, but the kind where you're just honest about what you know, honest about what you don't, and unwilling to protect yourself by making someone else look small. Derek tried the other way. He was smart enough to see what was happening and chose to undercut it instead of learn from it. That cost him rooms and projects and the kind of credibility that doesn't come back once it's gone. I don't say that with any satisfaction. I say it because it's the clearest illustration I know of how that particular choice tends to land. The intelligence piece is harder to talk about without sounding like you're congratulating yourself, but I'll try. Vivian didn't pull me in because I was likable. She pulled me in because I understood the material and didn't flinch when she asked hard questions about it. That kind of usefulness isn't an accident. It's hours nobody sees on models and contracts and briefing documents that won't have your name on them. I spent 2 years building knowledge I didn't know I'd ever get to use in the rooms where it mattered. It mattered. The work you do when nobody's watching is the only thing you actually own when someone finally turns the lights on. And then there's the part that's harder to name cleanly. The willingness to keep going when the path isn't clear. When people are making comments in hallways. When you're not sure whether what's happening is real or whether you're reading too much into forwarded emails from someone 3 levels above you. There were weeks where I genuinely didn't know what I was building or whether any of it would hold. I kept going anyway, not because I had certainty, because I had enough respect for the work itself to not quit on it just because it was uncomfortable. Vivian told me once, somewhere over New Mexico, on the flight back from Denver, that I'd been ready 6 months before I got the chance. I think she meant it as a compliment. I took it as a reminder, because the version of me that was ready didn't appear overnight. He was assembled quietly in borrowed conference rooms and late evenings and documents nobody else wanted to touch. That version existed before she ever noticed him. That's the part I try to hold on to.